Today we're going to be talking about a series of poets from the broader Indian subcontinent. During and in the wake of the incursion, let's use that word, of Islam. Islam began in the 7th century in Saudi Arabia and essentially spread like wildfire across North Africa and into South Asia and up into Eastern Europe. And when it hit India, it was coming up against the Hindu tradition, some of which we saw in the Mahabharata, where you have a lot of gods already very well established, a very rich and well ensconced culture, and then you had this other belief moving in with just one guy? One? That seems kind of paltry in comparison. But the way these things tend to work is that these ideas need to wrestle with one another over the course of, in some cases, centuries or millennia. And what that tends to do is produce an awful lot of great works of art, to be perfectly frank. When you have conflict in a culture, you have genius erupting, because people have to do all this advanced thinking and reconcile these competing ideas and figure out intellectually, spiritually, socially how to negotiate this new world, how to figure out what the hell does it all mean. And so out of that conflict, we tend to get great art, which is just a record of people trying to figure out what the hell it all means. And if you have a great plurality of ideas about what the hell it all means, every individual within that subset has to figure it out in their own way. And this is where you get stuff that's memorable. When a culture is monolithic and doesn't really have competing viewpoints, that culture is usually pretty stale. It's just the way it is. Totalitarian regimes produce awful culture. When you have great competition for philosophy, for religion, for social identity, when you have that, that's when great things tend to develop. The works that we're looking at today are the product of this kind of tension, where different ideas are rubbing up against one another, sometimes clubbing one another, but never quite dispelling one another. They're all struggling for some kind of position within this soup of culture. We start with Hinduism, and of course then you get the influx of Islam, and within that you also have a tradition of Sufism, which is a little bit more mystical. You have within that traditions of asceticism, which is often a kind of self-denial. Think about people who fast to attain spiritual enlightenment, or perhaps endure grueling physical hardships as a sign of devotion to God. Mysticism, which is an embrace of mystery, which is an embrace of some confusion and admittance that the world is difficult to read and we don't have all the answers. And so we need to consider the irrational, we need to consider the unknowable in order to find not necessarily answers, but a way towards answers. And within this, of course, we also have a healthy dollop of eroticism, which is a sexual element within those other elements. This sense of excitement, this sense of titillation that blends the spiritual and the physical, which you also see up there. Those elements are all churning within this as well. And of course, art does what it always does, which offers perspectives of, ideas about, expressions within the social, the theological, and the deeply personal realm. All of this is churning around in this work. All of this is struggling for recognition within the broader cultural landscape. They're making arguments for the superiority of their own position, perhaps, but they're always having to contend with the other. They can't just put blinders on and pretend it doesn't exist. Now, this is all within the Bhakti tradition, which is that meeting ground, largely, of Hindu polytheism and Muslim monotheism. The passionate worship of a single god within the Hindu pantheon. Here, predominantly in the ones that we have here, we're talking about poets who single out, for example, the god Shiva and says, okay, of all the gods, that's the one for me. It's like you can be a fan of baseball, but the Yankees are your team. And if they're not playing one night, yeah, you'll sit down and you'll watch the rest. You don't watch other teams. There's nothing else on. But your heart belongs to one. It's a not uncommon phenomenon in polytheistic beliefs worldwide.